أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. So the da'wah has begun, and Rasulullah ﷺ is calling the people that are close to him to Islam. And some of the early people who accepted Islam were a different mix of individuals, but the first people to make their Islam known public were known to be 7 individuals. There's a narration in Musnad Imam Ahmad, a Hasan narration from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, where he talks about 7 companions that were the first to make their Islam public, make their Islam known. And obviously, one of them is Muhammed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. There's Ammar bin Yasir radiallahu anhu. And there's his parents, Sumayya and Yasir. Suhaib al-Rumi is one of them. There's Bilal radiallahu anhu, and there's Al-Nabdad radiallahu anhu. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He protected Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam by the means of his uncle Abu Talib. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected Abu Bakr as-Siddiq by the means of his people, which is Banu Taym. Now, as for the rest of the believers, those who had accepted Islam, they were honestly at the mercy of the mushrikun. The other Muslims are going to be grabbed. There are many Muslims who are going to be dressed in armor made of iron and then sent to roast in the heat of the desert of the sun, which would reach up to 120, 130, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And all of them were able to find some type of relief from the torture by trying to attach themselves to family, by being a free individual or a tribe, and trying to seek protection. But then there were individuals like the early companions, like Bilal radiallahu anhu, who, because he was a slave, he didn't really have anywhere to go. So even the children of Mecca would tie Bilal up and drag him through the streets of Mecca, and he could do nothing but proclaim Ahad al-Ahad, calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was the one who took the Prophet's message, even in the first couple of days of his own Islam, to preach to some very prominent individuals who would accept Islam. And that's why Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is known to be as one of the frontline Muslims of the Ummah. Some of the most remarkable people in the early days of Islam became Muslim because of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's da'wah. And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu delivered the Prophet's message to the following people within the first 2 days of becoming Muslim. There's Zubair radiallahu anhu, there's Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, there's Talha ibn Ubaydullah radiallahu anhu, there's Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, there's Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu. Each one of these individuals, he told them about Islam and he personally took them to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In Seerah ibn Ishaq, there's a narration where it talks about how each one of these individuals were brought to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite Quran to them, and then told them about the truth of the religion of Islam, and then they believed and took their shahada. They would tell the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "La ilaha illallah wa ashhadu annaka rasulullah." And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he was a leader of his people. That's what made him so special. He's a very talented individual. He was a leader. He was also a businessman. He was of the most prestigious occupation back then. He was very well off financially, the closest companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, similar to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because his upbringing was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They've known each other since Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was about 10 years old. They were best friends. So just like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never engaged in indecency, never attended the nightclub type scenes that were prominent then, so did Abu Bakr as-Siddiq also refrain from such actions. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is also known as an individual who never worshipped an idol in his entire life, which is a rare occurrence. It means someone that is sincere, someone that is very, very special. that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would protect him from that. So he abstained from those. Now, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he had a very specific talent that was unique, that he was a genealogist. So he understood family lineages very well. He was an expert. So he knew the family lineages of every single person in Mecca. So he was, you could say, like the ultimate icebreaker, where if he didn't know your name, but he knew who you were related to, he can start a conversation. He just knew everybody. So because of this ability that he had, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, this gave him an advantage to know which people would accept Islam and which people probably wouldn't accept Islam, based on their family history, based on who they were, based on their family ties. You can kind of predict based on, these types of things. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one narration that we shared last week is that anybody that directs someone towards good, then it's as if he has done it himself. The reward is similar. So for example, if I want to pray and I say, hey, brothers, let's go pray. Every brother that prays, I also get rewarded for that. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is so amazing because these first few people that enter into Islam through the hands of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, which means that every individual actions that they committed, every individual deed, he also gets the reward for. And then every time they spread da'wah to other people, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq gets the reward for them too, and it just keeps going generation after generation after generation. So it's without question, it's not even difficult to say that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's book of deeds is still open. Even though he has passed away, his book of deeds is certainly still open, it's still writing constantly. Every single time we all here do a good deed, it's just being filled. And not with just Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, but all the companions. That's their biggest legacy. The Sahaba, especially these early ones, were sincerity personified. And the biggest legacy that they left behind wasn't the fact that they were remembered by the world. Because honestly, if they wanted to be remembered by the world, they would have never joined Islam in the first place. It was so small. It had no future. No one really, they just trusted in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but no one really knew where this was going to go. No one knew how many battles they were going to have to partake in. Nobody knew how much hardship it was going to take. Nobody knew how much torture and punishment they're going to have to go through, how much oppression they're going to have to face. So if they really wanted their name to be known, they would have never chosen this path. And so the reason their names are known and remembered throughout history and will always be echoed until the end of times is not as a favor to them, but it's actually a favor to us. Had it been their choice, they probably wouldn't have wanted to be remembered because they did it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But now we have people to look up to as role models. And so their biggest legacy is leaving us an example of sincerity, of loving the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how to love him, which is the essence of what this class is about. To find that deep love that we have for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The reason why we're all in this room is because all of us have love for him. But how can we increase in that love? How can we make sure that love is number one in our hearts? Right? How is Allah and His Messenger going to be the most beloved thing in our life? So one of those companions that was early accepted Islam in the hands of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu is Talha ibn Ubaydullah radiallahu anhu. His story is interesting. He went to a souq in Busra. And when he was there was a person who was worshiping in his temple. And this person was inquiring if anyone was from Ahlul Haram, aka Mecca. And so Talha, he presents himself and he says, yes, I'm from Mecca. And so Talha ibn Ubaydullah, he didn't hear about any revelation, any prophet, any Muhammad. He wasn't really aware of anything that was going on. So the worshipper asked him, has Ahmad appeared? You guys remember early on in our class, we talked about how Rasulullah ﷺ had multiple names. And of those names was Ahmad. Okay? Of those names was Ahmad, which his mother actually preferred to call him Ahmad when he was a very young boy. So the worshipper asked, has Ahmad appeared? And Talha ibn Ubaydullah, he responds, he says, who's this Ahmad you speak of? I don't know who this Ahmad is. So the worshipper, the one in the temple, he answered, he's the son of Abdullah, who is the son of Abdul Muttalib. This is the month in which he's supposed to be appearing to the people. Again, this is one of the proofs to show that the sincere individuals of the past nations, right, of those who identified with the Christian faith or those who identified with Judaism, they had an abundance of proof of a forthcoming prophet. An abundance of proof of a forthcoming prophet. Right? So when that time came, there was no excuse to not accept. And this man tells Talha ibn Ubaydullah that he's going to be the finality of all the prophets, and he will appear at the Haram. He will migrate to a place that has plenty of date palms. And he began to describe a city that had a landscape that was similar to Medina, which at that time was known as Yathrib. But you need to go find him. So Talha ibn Ubaydullah, he recalled that what that worshipper said made a lot of sense to him. So he quickly goes back home. He goes to Mecca. And when he got there, he starts asking around. He's like, did anything happen while I was gone? And there were some other Meccans that told him that, yes, Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Amin tanabba. So, which means, yes, Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Amin, he's claiming to be a prophet. Which is so funny, because listen, the narration literally says that these Meccans would say that Muhammad al-Amin, the one who is the most trustworthy, the most honest, al-Amin, is claiming to be a prophet. It's literally a contradiction in their own sentence. But that's what happens when you're delusional. That's what happens when you are living in cognitive dissonance and you say one thing and the next thing you contradict. AKA the propaganda that we see. Anyways. So yeah, so they would say this. And then so Talha went to Abu Bakr Siddiq. He went to Abu Bakr Siddiq. And he asked Abu Bakr Siddiq if he can take him to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So Abu Bakr Siddiq said, yes, you should go meet him and follow him too, because he calls you the truth. And then Talha radiallahu anhu, he says, wait till you hear my story. I met this man in Busra, and he told me this, he told me this. And so Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he took Talha to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Talha immediately accepted Islam as soon as he heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his message. Now, there's an individual who was a very fierce warrior during the time of the Prophet ﷺ with the Quraysh, an enemy of Islam. And his name is Nawfal bin Khuwaylid. He's also known as the Lion of the Quraysh. He's a very fierce warrior, non-Muslim, enemy of Islam. And he found out that both Abu Bakr Siddiq and Talha ibn Ubaydullah were Muslim. And when he found this out, he actually kidnapped them, both of them. And he took one rope and he tied them both together. Now, Banu Taym, who is Abu Bakr Siddiq's family and tribe, they weren't able to come rescue the prisoners immediately. So Abu Bakr and Siddiq and Talha radiallahu anhu, they were left tied for some time. And so from that day until their death, those two were known as Al-Qarinayn, known as, they were best buddies. They were known as the two close ones, because they experienced this hardship together and it made them bond significantly. Right? Those people that you go through hardship with, they're always the people that you bond with the most. And so what Nawfal did, it reached the Prophet Muhammad, news reached the Prophet. So the Prophet made dua, and as a result of that dua, Abu Bakr Siddiq and Talha radiallahu anhu were both able to escape. And so Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu was a direct cause of many people accepting Islam early on. Aisha radiallahu anha, she narrates from the Prophet and Abu Bakr Siddiq that literally the day after divine revelation first came down, Abu Bakr Siddiq went to the Prophet Muhammad and told him, Ya Abu al-Qasim, you are missing from the gatherings of your people today, and some people are saying that you're talking badly about our forefathers. And so Rasulullah replied to Abu Bakr Siddiq and said that I am the messenger of Allah and I call you to Allah. And as soon as the Prophet ﷺ finished presenting Islam to Abu Bakr, he accepted immediately without any hesitation. And as we mentioned last week, Rasulullah ﷺ actually told us that the only individual that did not hesitate for a moment was Abu Bakr Siddiq. Everybody else, even if it was just for a minute, even if it was for a few seconds, they had to think about it. Abu Bakr Siddiq didn't even have to think about it. He just jumped right in. So no one was more pleased with the Islam of Abu Bakr Siddiq than the Prophet Muhammad. Then, right after, the Abu Bakr Siddiq, he goes out. He finds Uthman ibn Affan. He presents to him Islam. He accepts. Talha ibn Ubaydullah accepts Islam. Zubair ibn Abdullah, Zubair al-Ru'an, he accepts. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he accepts. And then the very next day, Abu Bakr Siddiq, he goes and he finds who? Uthman ibn Mad'un, radiallahu anhu. Then he finds Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah. Then he finds Abdurrahman ibn Auf. Then he finds Abu Salama ibn Abd al-Asad, who is the husband of Salama. He will later pass away. And so Salama will be a widow. And then later, Rasulullah ﷺ is going to marry Salama, which is a great honor, you know. If you're a husband and you pass away, and then you find out that the person that your wife married after you was Rasulullah ﷺ, you're not even going to be mad. How could you be mad at that? Right? That's the best case scenario. Then there is Al-Arqam ibn Abi Al-Arqam. Who is who? Anyone know who he is? What's his significance? Why is he so special? Darul Arqam, right? Darul Arqam. So he's the founder of the first place in which the Muslims would gather and worship, because it was a secret. At first, it was still a secret. They weren't publicly preaching to everybody. So because it was secret, it had to be low key. So they would gather in the house of Al-Arqam ibn Abi Al-Arqam, Dar al-Arqam, and they would worship there. They would, Rasulullah would teach Islam there, would teach Quran there, would purify their character, would teach they would fall in love with the personality of the Prophet. So it's without a doubt that we could say that Dar al-Arqam was probably the highest institution of learning that this world has ever seen. Because those first 38 or 40 Muslims to accept Islam, those first 38 or 40 Sahaba to accept Islam, will go on to be the pillars of the deen, will go on to be the individuals that will liberate those who are shackled by worshiping the creation, and go from worshiping the creation to the creator. That's what ultimate liberation is. The moment that you can separate for your heart from worshiping the creation, from loving money too much, from loving the worldly life too much, and then worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead, that's the most liberating feeling you can have. No one wants to feel shackled by their desires. You want to feel like you have control over your desires. And that's the opposite of, unfortunately, what many societies preach today. Oh, indulge in your desires. Be your true self. This is your truth, man. You do whatever you want. But the reality is that if that's true, then why is it that when we engage in things, we engage in our desires, do we feel so terrible about ourselves? Why is it when we engage in desires, do we feel like we're so lost, that we need to be guided? Why does it feel so wrong? It's because it's the fitrah that's built within us that's not what we're supposed to be doing. That's the imprisonment, not the religion. The religion of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the liberation. It's what frees you from the shackle of worshiping the creation, of having your heart attached to this world and attaching it to something that is higher. And so these individuals, these 38, these 40 graduates of Dar al-Arqam, are going to get their graduation caps and are going to move on, and they're going to be the ones who bring people out of darkness and into the light of Iman. And there's so many of these companions, 38, 40. There's a list of them here. I'm not going to go through the entire list. It's going to take some time. But part of our journey in the Seerah is also engaging with the life of the companions. So one thing that I encourage all of us to do so that we can get a deeper understanding, I'm not going to be able to go in depth with every companion. It's just going to be impossible. Because if we do that, then it would be a Lives of the Companion class. Each companion has a rich seerah of their own. They have a rich history of their own, a rich biography of their own. But if you are interested in something like this, which I think is important for all of us to engage in, Qalam, my teacher's Mufti Kamani, he's doing a Lives of the Companion series. There's many Lives of the Companion series books that you can find, that you can read. Hayat al-Sahaba, right, is translated in English. I don't know how good the translation in English is. I've never read it myself. But the different books, there's also a lot of resources to learn about the lives of the companions. And it's also important for us to engage in that as well, because we begin to appreciate those who carry the torch forward. Many times we say that Rasulullah is ma'soom, right? Rasulullah is an individual who has never sinned in his entire life. He's perfect. His memorization was perfect. His ability to handle revelation was perfect. His ability to carry the message was perfect. Everything about him was perfect. So then when we move on to the companions, unfortunately, a common sentiment is like, oh, the companions made mistakes too. It's like, yeah, that's true. But the mistakes of the companions were more kind of like a lesson to us than it was actually a blemish on them. One of my teachers once said very beautifully that had it not been for the sin of the future generations and not knowing how to do tawbah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have never shown the companions committing sin. But it really is that right after the prophets, the best people are the companions. And unless we engage in their stories, we won't see why that is. We won't see the things that they did, the worship that they did, the sacrifices they made for Islam. So that's a really important part of the seerah as well. Now, in the early days of Islam, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, one day, he insisted to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that we should all go public as an ummah. Now, Rasulullah ﷺ didn't issue commands willy-nilly. When Rasulullah ﷺ would issue a command, it would immediately basically become law, Sharia. So Rasulullah ﷺ issuing a command was something that he would be very careful in doing. So in this instance, Rasulullah ﷺ himself wasn't a fan of the idea. But if he said, no, we're not going, then it would have been a command. So instead, he tried to appeal to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu and said that we are very few. I think we're strong because we're always all together, all 40 of us, all 38 of us. We're super excited about this. We're together, we have a family, we have a brotherhood, a sisterhood going. But we are very few. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq insisted. And so Rasulullah ﷺ said, okay, let's try it. So what the believers did is, and some of the scholars here also say that sometimes the best lesson is experience. So, Rasulullah ﷺ sometimes allowed the companions to do things even though he may not have been a fan of it. Obviously, if it's not sinful, right? If it's sinful, he would have to step in and stop it right away. But sometimes Rasulullah ﷺ would give the go-ahead for the companions to do something that may not have been the best and wisest choice, so that the experience of it teaches them a very profound lesson. A great example of this is actually the Battle of Uhud, which we will get to, inshallah. So all the believers, they all went out to the haram and they spread out. And the way they spread out was that each sahabi would sit next to some people from their tribe or their family, because that was a natural way of making a stronger showing. That if you wanted to hurt someone, if you wanted to bash somebody upside the head, and all of a sudden you see him sitting next to his tribe's people, the tribe people might say, this guy's crazy, and we know he's crazy, and we think he's crazy too, but he's our crazy. So you won't touch him. You won't do anything to him. So the Sahaba would have a bit of protection from their family members. After all the believers had spread out, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he stands up and he addresses everyone. So Abu Bakr Siddiq is the one who makes the public call to Islam. And he was sitting by Banu Hashim. Rasulullah was sitting by Banu Hashim. And this is the first time that someone stood as a khatib calling to Allah and His Messenger. And unfortunately, what happened is the people basically mobbed Abu Bakr. They just destroyed him. A lot of Muslims got beaten up. There was dozens of Muslims who were getting beaten up in different corners of the Haram. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, without a doubt, he got the worst of it. He was beaten so severely that his face became unrecognizable. Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, who was a very hateful enemy of Islam, he took his soled shoes off, his hard-soled shoes that were distinct at the time because these types of shoes in the desert were usually made soft and flexible. But he had a hard-soled shoe. And while Abu Bakr Siddiq was being thrown on the ground and being beaten up, Utbah sat on the chest of Abu Bakr Siddiq while he was getting beaten and began to pound Abu Bakr's face, specifically his nose, with the hard-soled shoe. And so Abu Bakr Siddiq, his nose was severely broken. His face became covered with blood. And basically, what the narration says is that he went unconscious. And he was basically beaten into a coma. And so when Banu Taym, Abu Bakr's family, saw what was going on, that a riot was literally happening, and they were just about to murder Abu Bakr Siddiq, they came and they pushed everyone off of Abu Bakr and they rushed him off to his mother's home. And his mother, her name is Khayr, the mother of good. Right? And this is an example of something called tafa'ul, which is when you hope for something good by saying good words. Right? I don't want to say it as like good luck because there's no such thing as luck. We don't believe in that, right? All is qadr Allah. But it's like good encouragement. When you give somebody a good name or say something good. A good example of this is like, young Ahmad, who's like 6 years old, he goes to the masjid and he's starting to learn the Quran and he's still on his alif ba ta. But when he comes home, his mom says, Hafid Ahmad, how's Quran today? Right? Obviously, he's not a Hafid yet. But in saying that, you're encouraging a good future for the child. So this was an example of that. What Abu Bakr Siddiq would call his mother Khayr, mother of good. So the people of Taym took Abu Bakr Siddiq to the house of Khayr and left him there. And they took an oath, Banu Taym, together. They said that if Abu Bakr Siddiq dies from his injuries, then we will publicly grab Utbah ibn Rabi'ah and murder him in front of everybody as retribution. So again, a lot of these people of Banu Taym, they weren't really big fans of Islam either. But that tells you how deep the tribalism ran. That we may disagree with our blood, we may disagree with our own, but you don't touch them. Right? If you do something like that, like it's over. Right? Reminds me of when we were kids. My little brother, Bassett, was not so little anymore, mashallah. Probably the biggest one in our family now. But we would pick on him a lot, right? Obviously, because he was like 4 or 5 years younger than all of us. So we would pick on him a lot. But I remember this one day where we were outside playing basketball, and there was some other random kid in the neighborhood who hit our little brother. And let's just say things didn't go well after that. Yes. Khair. Anyways, they took that oath, and some of Abu Bakr's family members were in the house, trying to talk to him, trying to get him to regain consciousness. Abu Bakr Siddiq, he didn't wake up for almost a day. Right? He was completely beaten to unconsciousness, almost like a coma. After waking up the next day, subhanAllah, look, after waking up the next day, the first thing Abu Bakr Siddiq says as soon as he regains consciousness, without a second hesitation, is ما فعل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. What happened to the Prophet? The last thing that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq saw was his people getting beat up before he blacked out at the Haram. And all the leaders of his family were sitting around Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Some of them started to curse at him. This guy's hopeless. He's a fanatic. He's done. He's crazy. He's lost it. You just died almost serving this Muhammad. Now you're asking about him? He's the reason why you're in this position in the first place. Why are you asking about this guy? And so they were frustrated, so they left. And they told his mother, Khair, some health-related advice, what food to give for him, what medicine to get for him. And then they took off. So Khair took some food to her son. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and asked, to have some food, have some medicine, regain your strength. Now Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, again, he says, مَا فَعَلَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. No one answered me. What happened to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Khair replies and says, Wallahi, I don't know what happened to your family. I'm just an old woman. I'm worried about my son. Let me take care of you. And Abu Bakr, he says, go to Jamil. She'll know. Jamil was the sister of Umar ibn Abi Khattab radiallahu anhu. So Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, his sister Jamil and her husband Sa'id ibn Zayd, who is actually one of the Ashra al-Bashara, one of the 10 people promised Jannah, and one of the early converts to Islam. Khair realized that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is not going to let her take care of him until he finds out about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Khair, he goes to Jamil and asks about the Prophet Muhammad. And Khair asks Jamil, what can you tell me about the Prophet? And she says that my son Abu Bakr sent me to ask you about Muhammad. And so Jamil replies, says, I don't know who Abu Bakr is, I don't know who Muhammad is. Now again, at this time, the da'wah was supposed to be secret. And to Jamil, the reason why she's lying, or I don't want to say this is one of the more permissible times of lying, because she's trying to protect her and her family. Because no one knows she's Muslim. Right? It's not public yet. And so as soon as it becomes public, it can cause serious harm. So she didn't want it to become public unless it came to the command of Rasulullah first. So it's one of those kind of like white lies, like Ibrahim alayhi salam, saying, oh, I didn't smash the stone, the idol, or, many examples of this that you can find in prophets' lives and the Seerah and things like that as well. So she lies initially to protect her faith. But then Khair understood what was going on here. So she asked Jamil to visit her son as he's recovering. So Jamil went to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And when she sees him in this bloodied state, she sees him in the state where you couldn't even recognize his face. Jamil screams, says, who are these people? Who did this to you? Whoever did this to you, I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes revenge on your behalf for those people. And when she saw what happened to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, her heart had softened. And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq responds and says, مَا فَعَلَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. He didn't say, yeah, I hope I get my justice. Yeah, do you know any good lawyers that can help me out? Or pray for me? He didn't say any of that. Which all would have been valid responses. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, our example, what did he say? مَا فَعَلَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. What happened to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And so Jamil said, your mother's listening. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq says, you don't have to worry about her. And so Jamil said, the Prophet is fine, he's safe. And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq asks her, where is he? And Jamil responds and says that he's in the house of Arqam. He's in Dar al-Arqam. So Abu Bakr then said to the disappointment of his mother that I swear to Allah that I will not taste anything. I will not drink a sip of water until I see the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ myself. And so Jamil and Khair waited until the evening before they left for where the Prophet ﷺ was staying. And Abu Bakr, he leaned on them both as they walked to Arqam's house, leaning on them, right? Struggling to even get there. In the moment that Rasulullah ﷺ sees Abu Bakr as-Siddiq walk through the door, the Prophet ﷺ immediately stops everything. He stands up. He runs to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He embraces his right-hand man. And he kisses Abu Bakr as-Siddiq on the forehead. And the Prophet ﷺ, seeing his state, he became very emotional. Started to tear up significantly. And that's when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he says to the Prophet ﷺ, O Messenger of Allah, may my father and mother be sacrificed for you, which is like a phrase that the Arabs would use to say that basically what? Like, I would do anything for you. I would sacrifice all that I love for you. He says, I don't care what some wretched man does to my face. I see you now and I know that you're okay. And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he establishes his iman. He establishes his love for the Prophet ﷺ first. And as soon as he got what he wanted, to see that the Prophet ﷺ was safe, now is he going to worry about himself? No. He still doesn't say anything about his condition. He still doesn't say anything about his state. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, as soon as he confirmed that the Prophet ﷺ was alive and was okay, now the second thing is on his mind, which is what? Ya Rasulullah, this is my mother. She's a good mother. She takes care of her. She took care of her son. She doesn't understand why I believe in what I believe in, why I make the sacrifices that I make for you, why I was so desperate to see you. But she took care of her son and did right by her son. She has a clean heart. Ya Rasulullah, you are blessed. Please call her to Allah. Make dua on her behalf to Allah and put Islam in her heart. And I hope that she will be saved by the fire by means of you, O Messenger of Allah. Ya Rasul. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, if there's any narration that can sum up the life of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, it's the narration where Rasulullah ﷺ says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من ولده ووالده والناس أجمعين. That narration right there is the summary of the life of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. That no one truly has faith until Rasulullah ﷺ is more beloved to them than their children, than their father, than their mother, than all of the people. Rasulullah ﷺ coming first, and then him worrying about his mother, and then he worried about himself. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he makes dua for her guidance. He calls her to Islam. Khair, the mother of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and she accepts Islam. And I have no doubt it's the pure heart of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq that was also a driving factor in that as well. When people see the spirituality of another Muslim, when they see their tawakkul, when they see their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it inspires them. It inspires people. When we see the iman of our brothers and sisters in Gaza, it doesn't just inspire us. It inspires non-Muslims across the globe. Right? I'm sure you guys have seen, that TikTok sister that started that whole non-Muslims reading Quran movement? She accepted Islam, and people started a whole week. I've just been seeing TikTok videos of all these people accepting Islam, accepting Islam, accepting Islam. All these institutions, all the masajid across America are getting like converts on a weekly basis since this crisis has started, since the massacre in Gaza has started. And like 80% of them have one reason, and the one reason is I just saw what happened in Gaza, I saw the faith these people had, and I knew it had to be true. I knew their hearts had to be clean. I've seen hundreds of videos of what's going on there. Now, granted, I haven't seen all of them because it's a lot. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them. But one thing that I realized yesterday that was very fascinating to me is I have yet to see one video where a Palestinian in Gaza is cursing the oppressor. They're all just calling out to Allah. Ya Allah ansurna. Oh Allah help us. Oh Allah forgive us. Oh Allah grant us paradise. For some reason, I don't understand. I don't understand. I'm here, I'm getting so angry seeing the oppression of my brothers and sisters. And they're the ones experiencing it. And I haven't seen one curse word out of their mouth. It's amazing. It's nothing short of, these are the best people on earth. These are the best people on earth. And so there's no sacrifice that goes unrewarded. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he went out to preach to other people. He got beat up for it. And whether the people listened or not, as a result of that sacrifice, his second most beloved person in his life, his mother, accepts Islam. And so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Khayr, they stayed a whole month together in the house of Arqam, just learning about the deen together. And at this time, what this narration specifically says, that there were about 39 people in the house at that time. Then comes a story of a companion by the name of Amr ibn Abbas al-Sulaymi, radiallahu anhu, who met with Rasulullah in the early days of his prophethood. And in those days, Rasulullah was still keeping quiet about Islam. So Amr, he asked the Prophet ﷺ, who are you? And the Prophet ﷺ said that I am a prophet. And Amr, he said, what is a prophet? And Rasulullah ﷺ said, I'm a messenger of God. He asked, did Allah send you? The Prophet said, yes. And then what did Allah send you with? He says that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and you do not associate any partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you break your idols, and you keep good relations with your family members. That's all he told them. And so Amr said, this is very beautiful. This is amazing. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent you with. Who is with you in this message? Who joins you in this message? Who is in your cause? And the Prophet said, Al-Hur wal-Abd, the free and the slave, both of them are in my cause, are with you in this message. And so while Amr was actually having this conversation with the Prophet ﷺ, standing on either side of the Prophet was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, who was a free, successful man, and Bilal radiallahu anhu, who at this time was a slave, but will become a free, successful man himself later on. And so that was what made Islam attractive to people, is that it was for everybody. Much of the deen of the mushrikun, the legacy of the idolaters in Quraysh, was that this idea of, let's say, like generational wealth. That if you weren't an honored individual, or your parents or your great-great-grandfather wasn't an honored person, then the chances of you becoming an honored person is very low. That was their deen. The powerful stayed powerful, and the oppressed became more oppressed. So the 1% continues to make more wealth, and the 99% continues to lose more wealth. Wallahi, if you study the Seerah, you'll see that the similarities of the Quraysh pre-Islam is very similar to what society is experiencing today. But what we hear is Islam is the one that's backwards, right? You literally went back. You literally went back. And then you're calling Islam backwards. Allahu Akbar. Again, just the contradiction in the words. And so Islam came and rectified all that. Whether you're the oppressed or whether you're the oppressor, you can change your life. You can change your life. which is why there are many companions who in the early days of Islam were the oppressors. Khalid bin Walid, Umar ibn Khattab, radiallahu anhu. It's a great example right there. Okay. Who else? Abu Sufyan, right? Who else? Amr ibn al-As. So many examples of these leaders, these warriors, these strong individuals opposing Islam, and then later on accepting Islam and becoming the best of people this world has ever seen. That's what Islam does. It changes everybody. Right? It came to bring justice to society. So Amr accepted Islam and he was one of the early converts. Now there is also someone by the name of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu was from the Prophet's family. The Sahaba would say that Abdullah bin Mas'ud was from the Prophet's family. You know, when the ayah in Surah Nur that tells Surah Ahzab, sorry, I'm blanking here. The ayah where seeking permission before you enter the home of the Prophet. Surah Ahzab, right? And you have thought here? No? Okay, I think it's Surah Ahzab. Seeking permission to enter the home of the Prophet was revealed. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he shared this ayah with the companions. And when he taught them the manners of how to seek permission to enter the house into the Prophet's home, you know, knocking 3 times, pronouncing yourself, Assalamu alaikum, it's so and so, waiting for the confirmation to enter, and then entering, all these different manners, you know, not just for the Prophet's home, but honestly, you should do this for anybody's home, right? Anybody's home. Or just walk in, and no, he's my buddy, I can just walk in. No, still, don't do that, right? Don't do that. You know, one of the best ways to knock on someone's door or ring someone's doorbell is that when you ring their doorbell or you knock on their door, especially nowadays because a lot of homes have like windows or like peepholes or things like that you can kind of see into the home. You just ring the doorbell, you knock the door, and then you turn your back to the door slightly and you wait for the door to open, right? And then you can slightly turn with your head down and you ask Assalamu alaikum, you know, and then if they let you in, they let you in, right? But the idea is that you want to put yourself in a position where regardless of what's going on in the home, you won't see anything until the person in the home basically confirms that you are allowed to see it, that it is permissible for you to see, or that it's appropriate for you to see. But then after he explained that to the Sahaba, Rasulullah, he looks at Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and he told him, the way you seek permission is you just lift the curtain up and walk right in. Right? Basically everything I just told you guys not to do, right? But this is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Right? Still telling you not to do it. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was given that special virtue by the Prophet Muhammad, right? That if you want to go into my house, you just lift the curtain and walk right in. That was his special status. The Prophet ﷺ told Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu that when one of your legs is weighed on the day of judgment, it will be heavier than the 7 heavens and the 7 earths. Just one of your legs. So all the Sahaba used to say that all knowledge would end with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. That if Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says something, there's a narration that comes from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, listen up. Because the Prophet ﷺ specifically made dua for Abdullah ibn Mas'ud to have faqah in the deen, to be someone who understands the deen. And so Rasulullah even himself, he said, anything you hear from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, know it came from me. Know it came from me, right? There's actually some very interesting hadith science implications with these narrations about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, which is why, you know, for example, like in the Hanafi madhab, if a narration comes from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, it's taken with a very serious degree of weight, right? So it has actual like fiqh implications, everyday fiqh implications that you'll see in daily life. is a result of these narrations, where Prophet ﷺ is talking about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud specifically. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he was a young boy, right? When he accepted Islam. And we talked last week as well about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's story with the Prophet ﷺ and the camels that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was taken care of. And Rasulullah ﷺ asked for one of the camels that had already been milked. And he rubbed his hand, he said, Bismillah. The three of them, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, they all drink from the camel. And then Abdullah ibn Mas'ud saw this miracle and he accepted Islam. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was also one of the original Huffaz of the Quran. He had his own handwritten manuscript of the Quran. And at the time that he was narrating this specific story, he had memorized 70 surahs, which tells us that at the time that he was narrating this specific story of him and the camels and him accepting Islam, that 70 surahs were revealed by that time. This doesn't mean by the time the story was happening, by the time he narrated the story. Okay, so different. Then the public command came in. And it came in two phases. The first phase is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. You will now invite your family members and those who are closest to you. So Rasulullah he gathered his family members, about 30 or 40 members, or some leaders of Quraysh. You know, Abu Lahab was a leader of Quraysh, Abu Jahl was a leader of Quraysh, uncles of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And so he gathers them together and he serves everybody food and milk. He has one bowl of milk and they sacrifice one sheep. And from that, a miracle occurs in front of their eyes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills in order for the people to take his message seriously. That every individual in that gathering was able to eat to their fill and drink to their fill from one bowl and one sacrificed sheep. And then before he can even begin preaching the message of Islam to people, Abu Lahab, who kind of at this point already knows what's kind of going on, so he's trying to shut it down in its tracks before it happens. He starts to accuse the Prophet ﷺ of certain things immediately. He says, one sheep, one bowl of milk, and we all ate to our fill. The Prophet ﷺ is a magician. He's practicing black magic. He's practicing sihr. And he's trying to put sihr on us. So one narration says that out of this, some of the family members of Quraysh got scared and they scattered. Someone said that another narration says that Abu Lahab left and then they followed him because he was considered to be the leader of Banu Hashim, which is the family of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So Abu Lahab was the first to refute and brush off the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And then he gave them da'wah another time, where he brought everybody together and served them again. And the same thing happened, you know, the miracle of being able to feed everybody from a small amount until they ate and drank to their fill. And then he gave them da'wah. Ali radiallahu anhu was the first to stand up and show his support. He was already Muslim, but now he's showing his support publicly. And Ali radiallahu anhu, he was 10 years old when he first accepted Islam. So now at this point, because the da'wah is going public, and we said that the secret da'wah lasted 3 years, now Ali radiallahu anhu is the age of 13 years old. And as a result of his bravery in front of the rest of Banu Hashim, at this time, Ali radiallahu anhu, in terms of his status, was the lowest person in that room. Was the lowest person in that room. And he stood up, being brave, being courageous. And he proclaims his support to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is happy to see this. He's proud of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he tells them that there will come a day where you will be a leader after me. After me, you will become a leader. And that day came. Ali radiallahu anh was the fourth Khalifa in Islam. He's from the Khulafa al-Rashidun, the rightly guided leaders, caliphs of Islam after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And many of the family of Quraysh kind of laughed it off too, because they said, look, the only one that is accepting you, the only one that is supporting you is the young one. And so, like I said, in that room at that time, Ali radiallahu anh may have been, in terms of status, the lowest one. But now we look back at it and say what? That aside from the Prophet ﷺ, the person that had the highest status in that room was actually Ali radiallahu anh. Abu Talib, who's the father of Ali radiallahu anh, and the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who basically raised him, father figure of the Prophet ﷺ, he said that he will continue to worship the religion of his father, but he will, which is idolatry, but he will be by the side of the Prophet ﷺ and protect him. And this was very important. The Prophet ﷺ needed protection. Because of tribalism, there was this concept called jiwa, where if Abu Talib, especially being an individual who had a lot of influence, pronounces to everybody that Muhammad is under my protection, no one can harm him. They still tried, which we'll talk about extensively next week. Some of the evil things that the Quraysh tried to do to the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. And so that's actually why the scholars say that's one of the wisdoms of why Abu Talib did not accept Islam. Was because had he accepted Islam, the Quraysh would not have respected this jiwar. And even though there are times that they didn't, it would have been much more severe. So they say the wisdom of Abu Talib not accepting Islam is that he can be the protection of the Prophet ﷺ. Now obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not unjust. So Abu Talib did receive that opportunity to accept Islam on his deathbed, and most of us know the story, which he did not take, unfortunately, which is actually a very heartbreaking moment in the Seerah. Because Abu Talib, although not a Muslim, is someone that is beloved to us. Reality is someone who is beloved to us. And the reason why he's beloved to us is because he's beloved to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He helped the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He loved the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He raised the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Without Abu Talib's support, Islam would have never grew. So we can show love to the Prophet, to Abu Talib, right? After his family, he was now commanded to go public. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرُ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Proclaim what you have been commanded and turn away from the polytheist. إِنَّا كَفَيْنَاكَ الْمُسْتَهْزِئِينَ. Surely we will be sufficient for you amongst those who try to mock you. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel here. Right? And don't worry about these people who are going to try to come against you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be sufficient for you. He will protect you. He will allow you to carry this message forward. الَّذِينَ يَجْعَلُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ فَسَوْفَ يَعْلَمُونَ. Those who set up other gods with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will soon come to know. So these verses are telling Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you will now be public about what you were given. You now have to go to everyone. No more being apologetic. Be proud, be confident, talk about Islam to them. So that's when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he takes this command very seriously by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He climbs up Mount Safa, which to this day is the closest mountain to the Kaaba. And just like he was able to see what was on the other side of the mountain, he calls the people of Quraysh, brings them together. And all of the people of Quraysh gather, and they see the Prophet Muhammad on the top of this mountain. And he was given the ability to see what lies on the other side of the mountain, and he warns the people. He tells them that if there had been an army on the other side of this mountain that's coming to hurt you, would you believe me if I said this? And everybody agreed. Unanimous decision. Of course we will believe you. You're Sadiq, you've never lied in your life. Why would we not believe you now? Why would we not believe you now? And so Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just like he saw what's on the other side of the mountain, he can also see what's on the other side of this life. He can see the other side that's in this life. So he warns us, he can see what's in the grave. So he warns us about Yawm al-Qiyamah. He warned us about Jannah. He warns about Jahannam. And all of these beautiful things through revelation. No one has ilm al-ghayb like Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has complete vision. He is al-Muhit, the one who's all-encompassing. وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Him alone belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is in the earth, and He is fully aware of everything. But after Allah, He can give aspects of ilm al-ghayb to whom He wills. And the prophets would receive some aspects of ilm al-ghayb. Not all of it. Not all of it. Right? So for example, they don't know anything about the Day of Judgment. No one knows about when the Day of Judgment is going to occur except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one knows the day when the blowing of the trumpet is going to happen except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are signs, but the actual day, no one knows. It's a narration that tells us that it's going to happen on a Jum'ah, but the actual Jum'ah, no one knows. Right? So one of the scary things, the narration that tells us that the one who's going to blow the trumpet, Israfil, the angel who's going to blow the trumpet, right? He's waiting, but the trumpet's actually on his lips. As we're speaking, Israfil has that trumpet that's going to blow and start the Day of Judgment or cause the Day of Judgment on his lips. Right now, as we're sitting in this room, as we're speaking, just waiting for the command. That's his job. That's the job that he was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's there, it's waiting. Which is a very scary thought to think about. That the moment that command comes, it's done. Right? So they said, of course, we would believe in you. Warning of a day lying ahead. And so that's when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he begins to warn every individual family. Ya Bani Ka'b, Ya Bani Lu'ay. So sorry, Ya Bani Ka'b ibn Lu'ay. أنقذوا أنفسكم من النار. يا بني مرة ابن كعب. أنقذوا أنفسكم من النار. يا بني عبد الشمس أنقذوا أنفسكم من النار. يا بني عبد مناف أنقذوا أنفسكم من النار. يا بني هاشم أنقذوا أنفسكم من النار. يا بني عبد المطلب أنقذوا أنفسكم من النار. يا فاطمة أنقذي نفسك من النار. So all these tribes, rescue yourselves from the fire. And he sees his daughter Fatima, rescue yourself from the fire. Because he says, why? فإني لا أملك لكم من الله شيئا غير أن لكم رحما سأبلها ببلالها. That I have no power to protect you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in anything except this relationship that I'm asking you to sustain with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This Islam, this is the only thing that I have the power of telling you in order to protect yourself from the hellfire. And so one of the beautiful things where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells Fatima radiallahu anha, he points out Fatima radiallahu anha specifically, because Fatima radiallahu anha it's his most beloved, it's his daughter. Fatima radiallahu anha is going to be the one who was known later as Sayyidun Nisa in Jannah. She's going to be the one who leads the women into paradise. Fatima radiallahu anha. That her status is very special. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifically pointing out Fatima radiallahu anha says, even you, I don't have any power to help you on the day of judgment except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. Right? And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will that, inshallah, with the intercession of the Prophet Muhammad. But the reality is without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, the Prophet's power has nothing. It's only through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he's singling out even Fatima radiallahu anha. So like if there's anyone that's guaranteed Jannah, it's Fatima radiallahu anha, but even you got to protect yourself from the hellfire. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is warning these tribes, he's warning his family members, he's warning all of Quraysh, save yourself, rescue yourselves from the hellfire, build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, get rid of all these idols. I won't be able to help you on the day of judgment. And so that's when Abu Lahab, he stands up, right? And this guy, man, always jealous, always envious, always wanting to put Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam down. He says, Tabban lak. May you be cursed all day. Tabban lak is like a continuous curse. That may you be cursed all day. You gather us for this small useless speech of yours. If he was speaking the truth, I would be the first to accept it since I am his uncle. But he's speaking nonsense. I'm not going to accept it and nobody else should accept it either. And so this made the Prophet ﷺ extremely upset because his own are now against him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to defend Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And out of all the people standing against Islam in the entire history of Islam, and even during the 23 years of revelation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only mentions one person by name in the Quran of the enemies of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tabbat yada Abi Lahab wa tab. May the hands of Abu Lahab perish, and he himself perish. And then the verses of Surah Al-Masad was revealed as a defense to the Prophet ﷺ against Abu Lahab and his extremely treacherous wife as well, which we will discuss, inshallah ta'ala, next week if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us life. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to do amal upon what we learned. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to rectify our hearts through the seerahs, through the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Before we go though, do we have any questions? By the way, that verse about entering the house, Surah Nur, verses 27 through 29. Any questions from brothers? Questions from the sisters? No? Online? Any questions? Okay. Tamam. If you have any questions, I'll be here. I'll just hang out inshallah for a minute. So feel free to come up. Jazakallah khair. I'll see you guys inshallah ta'ala next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.